right there to there, where the woman is fed for 1,260 days till the end of tribulation. Now it's pretty easy to look here now to see how much of a gap this is. If from there to there is 1,290 days, and from there to there is 1,260 days, we see that this gap over here between the time the altar is shut down to the abomination is set up, it shows, according to Daniel's day counts, that is a 30-day period right there. And the serpent, let's go to that, Revelation 12, and the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away with the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. So there's a flood right here too. In Jerusalem, around springtime, there is a lot of rain, and it rushes down, I believe, into the Dead Sea. I'm not going to get into that because I'm not really fully sure of exactly when this rain starts, but it's said, I've heard it said that this is a rainy time of the season for over there. Now, in Revelation 11, he says that God says, I will give my power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days. That's exactly the same of days right there. Clothed in sackcloth, these are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. The same amount of period of time. This 1,260 days is given there. So this is when that altar and that abomination is set up, that's when the 2 witnesses stand up and start their 1,260 days of prophesying. They have the power to shut the heavens up from rain and cast as many plagues on the earth as they will. Now we're back to the Lord's words here again. In Matthew 24, he said, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun and the moon shall be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man coming in heaven. In other words, it says immediately after tribulation. It says let's go back and read that one more time. Immediately after tribulation, they'll see the Son of Man coming in heaven. Immediately after tribulation, and then shall appear the sign of man in heaven. And these are the days after tribulation. This says there's a 45-day period from the end of tribulation until the wedding feast. What we need to find out is that spot right there. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have about 8 or 9 different indicators of what this day will be like. We have abomination, we have desolate, we have fleeing, we have tribulation beginning, we have winter is over, it was not on the Sabbath. There's a lot going on. There's a flood. Everything's going on right here at this hinge. We need to find that hinge. Let's look at something that's very, very interesting, that's a likeness of what these things describe. I hope you can read this on your screen. This is pretty small to get it all on this one screen here, but I didn't have any other way to do it. It says, a lamb was brought forth into the house on this day and kept and killed on the very first Passover. This is and then all the firstborn in the land of Egypt was killed, who didn't have the lamb's blood on the doorpost. And then right after that, Israel departed into the wilderness on the Exodus. God parted the Red Sea, and Israel crossed over on dry ground. We're talking about the same language here. We're talking about a lamb. We're talking about a house. This is God's house. We're talking about Israel going into their new homes in the Promised Land. We're talking about a sacrifice. We have blood, the firstborn, fleeing, water, war, death. All of these things is the picture likeness, is a word picture of what you're seeing right here. Now, 40 years later, after Israel crossed over the Red Sea and wandered around the wilderness, God dried up the Jordan River for Israel. This is under Joshua's leadership. And God's firstborn crossed over on dry ground to take possession of the Promised Land and their homes. And there was a lot of bloodshed and a lot of war so they could take over these possessions here. So we have the same language going on here again 40 years later. And we also have the same miracle happen. God dried up the Red Sea. They crossed over. He dried up the Jordan River. He crossed over. There's a flood going to happen here that God's going to help, and the earth's going to swallow it up too. So it's the same type of language. Also, we come to Yeshua, the first begotten Son. He rode into Jerusalem, it says, the Lamb presented for the inspection into God's house before he was crucified 4 days later. We even have Yeshua riding in, and he was the acceptable sacrifice. He was not an abomination. He was brought there for it. That's why he rode in. He was the lamb inspected before the sacrifice was to happen. They didn't know what they were doing, but that's spiritually what it represented. And now we come to an unacceptable lamb or image of some kind we brought into God's house and presented for inspection and set up on the Temple Mount. This abomination starts, the tribulation causes those in Judea to flee as God causes the flood waters to be swallowed up as was the times before. Now, when they brought the lamb into the house before the first Passover, before Israel left Egypt, it was on Nisan the 10th they were commanded to bring it into the house. But now whenever Joshua led the children of Israel across the Jordan River, and the Jordan River dried up. They crossed over dry shod over that river. That was also Nisan the 10th. When Yeshua rode into Jerusalem on that little colt of an ass, he rode into Jerusalem. That was also Nisan the 10th. Obviously, this unacceptable image is called a lamb with two horns, and lambs don't have horns. This is obviously an unacceptable sacrifice or unacceptable image some kind is brought into God's house on Nisan the 10th also. So what we've got here, we've got all this information, all these clues, and it all points to Nisan the 10th. And it also points to that it's in after winter time. It's in March the 21st. Now, it has to be Nisan the 10th or March the 21st or later, after winter's over with. So let's bring down our markers again. Here's the altar. Here's the wedding feast, the one known blessed day that we know. And here's the abomination when the abomination is done. So according to the scriptures, all we have to do to find this spot is start at some wedding feast, some blessed day, and simply count back 1,335 days. That brings us to the altar. Or to find the image date, we count backwards 1,305 days, brings us to the image date. Another way to find the image date is count the full 1,335 back to the altar and then count forward 30 days. It's all going to bring us to this point right here. This is the gateway. This is the door, one of the doors that no man opened unless God opens it, and no man can close it unless God closes it right here. We find this doorway right here, and we found when the Great Tribulation starts. Now, according to the information we've been given through Daniel and the other scriptures, it says this date is Nisan the 10th. It's not in the winter. If it's not in the winter, then it's on our March 21st or later. It's not on the Sabbath. It's before Passover. If it's March the 10th, that's obviously before Passover. This vision of Revelation 12 where the woman flees has to take place. And it has to fit Daniel's timeline. It must be in 2013. In other words, it has to fit these day counts that's been given to us in Daniel. And it also has to be in the year 2013, as according to the prophecies in Daniel and the fig tree nation that came about. And all this has to fit. So, if we remember back on our Hebrew calendars, now our focus is going to be on these last 7 years. Matter of fact, these last 3.5 years. The Hebrew calendar was based on lunar. The Hebrew years will have 12 or 13 months. It varies. The Gregorian calendar is solar based. It always has 365 unless it's a leap year. And these two different methods of calculation always makes these calendars inconsistent with each other. So what we have to do, well, this is an example first. The Feast of Tribulation, which is the wedding feast, this right here, always falls on the Hebrew date 7/15 every year. But it falls on a different Gregorian date each year. It falls somewhere in September.